If we don't learn to heal our inner child as adults, what will happen to us?
Well, we can actually develop the same type of inner child wound in our children.
Ooh.
Yeah.
So they don't have to experience the wound. We're just passing it on, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that comes up, of course, we're talking about intergenerational trauma having some biological, connections, right? Like, so there's already a family that perhaps is already from a nervous system perspective, from perhaps an epigenetic perspective, already having tenderness and vulnerabilities that are emotional. And then you have, the possibility of there being like misattunement between a caregiver and their child. The caregiver may be so preoccupied with their own stress and trauma that they miss the social cues that their child is telling them, I need you. And that sense of emotional abandonment, can surface, or an inability to really relate to and connect with others, which is kind of like the general foundation of like attachment and attachment styles, right? A lot of those things can start to surface as a result of those initial imprints of the relationships that are primary to us, which are with our caregivers or individuals that are in essence taking care of us in the school system, any of the individuals that have proximity. And then, it's going to be really important for us to also understand that whenever we're talking about like not wanting that to carry on to the next generation, not wanting that tender little soul in front of us to then experience the pain that we have carried for so long, we have to talk about how we can also heal our own wounds. We need to reparent ourselves while we're also parenting others.
Right.
So it's an intergenerational reparenting.
Something just came up for me as you were saying this, because I think I'm not a parent yet, but I get the sense and the feeling that a lot of parents in America today are very protective of their kids. I see this. Maybe it's not everywhere, but I see a lot of that happening. They're more worried about, who they're hanging out with. I hear a lot of parents say, I'm never gonna let my kid do sleepovers anymore. I'm taking them out of public school because it doesn't feel safe, or whatever it is, right? They're just more protective as opposed to allowing their children to kind of fumble and learn along the way. And I'm curious in your perspective from what you've experienced and what you've seen with your clients, your patients, is it worse to allow our children to be, free in the world and be vulnerable to potential harm? Or is it worse to overprotect them and pass on our own traumas and wounds because we keep them so close to our wounded self?
I would say that it is important for us to actually allow them to have some connection to the world that isn't necessarily overprotected by us. However, it is going to be really critical for us to, as parents or parents to be, to also vet the environments that they're a part of. Mm-hmm. We need to vet the people that are their babysitters and ask them questions that are taboo, that are uncomfortable, that are likely to actually protect our children.
Right. Be uncomfortable with your questioning.
Be uncomfortable with your questioning so that you don't have to live a life of discomfort because you didn't ask the question and properly vet the person.
Right.
And then something would have happened that could have been avoidable. Not always, right? We can't say that, it's the onus is on parents. The onus is really on people who, just aren't protective of the children that they're connected to. But beyond that vetting process, right, which is a vetting process that is permissive because you're also allowing the child to be in the world and explore and understand and enjoy the world and fumble and pick themselves back up. And what we know about that process is that also builds resiliency, right? And so we need that process in our lives in order to actually be resilient adults. But it's also going to be critical, as I see it, specifically as cycle-breaking parents, for us to then transition into also being advocates on behalf of our children. We need to also, in whatever way is possible, advocate for the systems that they're a part of, for them to keep them safe. Right? Like advocate for better safety in schools, which, as we see in today's world, especially in the US, is like really compromised. And, also advocate for the laws that hold people accountable when they hurt children. Right? And it's like all of these things that are also systemic are also going to be a part of the process of how we parent forward
Right.
in a way that's different.
Sure. What about the epigenetic element of this? This is how much of trauma is genetic versus kind of emotional mirroring and then passing on through just environment, space, emotions onto another nervous system. Is it a genetic thing that we carry, or is it more of like we're just observing it all day long and these responses?
Well, what we know about intergenerational trauma, it is the only type of trauma that has a bit of both, right? So it actually can be found at the intersection of our biology, which is all of those, kind of epigenetic factors, and our nervous system, and really kind of like the structure of our biology really early on, cellular memory, all of those things. And our psychology, which is in essence kind of everything that happens thereafter, right? Like after we're formed, after we're born, after, we're out of the womb, there's a lot of interactions that we have with people, with systems, like all of those interactions then actually create a certain experience, an emotional experience that can trigger a trauma response or perhaps never allow it to surface. And so it's a little bit of both, but the thing about coming from families that they themselves have had any kind of trauma that has been longstanding and has been held in the body and has been held in their behaviors is that typically what tends to happen is that our bodies actually reflect the trauma that we have engaged in, the trauma that our bodies are constantly trying to fight, right? Like when our bodies are in this nervous system alert and threat response for an extended period of time, it actually can transition the ways in which our genes actually turn on or off, which is the general premise of epigenetics. Whatever is happening in our environment socially is impacting the ways in which our genes are turning on or off. And so what happens at conception is that both parents actually have genetic markers or genetic messaging that actually gets translated to a baby at conception, including, of course, all the physical features and things like that, but also including a lot of these other things that are a part of just the general emotional makeup that a child can be born into. Step 2 is relaxation. Step 2 is actually going into any kind of practice you choose, right? But it can be breath work, it can be meditation, it can be Tai Chi, it can be yoga, it can be so many that can actually help your body to release some of that tension.